to go on to another chapter, you ask people to reject ideology. And I think everything we've been talking to up till now, that's not ideology. That's something deeper. Ideology seems to be the surface level understanding of the world. I wanted to get your take.
Ideology is crippled religion.
Yeah, crippled.
Fundamentally. Like it drives all, as far as I can tell, and I explored this a lot in Maps of Meaning, because it's one of its main themes is exactly that exploration, is we have a religious sense, which we've just talked about, grounded to some degree in our capacity for experiencing awe. Ideologies hijack that, and they do it they're idols in the classic Old Testament sense. That's exactly what they are, is they're false idols, and they promise but don't deliver, and they are replacements for God. I saw this actually in Canada. Technically, I always had a suspicion that nationalism, for example, was essentially a religious impulse gone wrong. No, it's the attribution of the attributes of God. It's the attribution of transcendent assets to the state. So it's the misapprehension of the transcendent in the state. I did read a Gallup poll at one point that indicated that in Quebec, if you were a lapsed Catholic, you were many times more likely to be a separatist. And that's exactly what Quebec looked like to me, because it underwent its devolution from feudalism in some sense in the late 1950s, maybe the last European country to do so, and instantly replaced its profound Catholicism, profound and deep Catholicism, with 19th century nationalism, which was an ill fit from my perspective, because, look, if you're going to be oppressed, you're going to have to pick a better group than Anglo-Canadians to be, the carriers of your projection of oppression. We're just not that good at it. So, but that's the thing. Also, I think that the rationalist atheist types don't quite get, they don't think of religious behavior as biological or instinctual. And so they underestimate its potency and the dangers it poses if it's not bound in the proper forms. And then it manifests itself in ideological possession. And yeah, that's chapter 6, I believe, Abandon Ideology. It's and a lot of Beyond Order is, and Maps of Meaning as well, the first book I wrote, is part of its goal was an antidote to ideology. I wanted to ground people in a more comprehensive view of the world, and to me that has 7 elements. There's the element of the dragon of chaos. This is all implicit in Beyond Order. There's the dragon of chaos. That's the unknown as such, the source of everything, whatever that might be. There's the natural world in its positive and negative forms, the social world in its positive and negative forms, and the individual in his or her positive and negative forms. And you need a representation for each of those domains to have a full narrative view, as far as I can tell. And there should be, you can tell a story by making any of those characters interact with any of the other characters. Man against himself, man against culture, woman against man, nature against culture. Those are standard narrative tropes, but you have to understand, you have to have a representation for all of those domains, positive and negative, to have a worldview that is unbiased in my estimation. And ideologies only provide a partial representation at best.
But they seemingly provide a quick answer to a complicated problem. And, this is what I've noticed. Definitely, it's been evident, especially in my generation, especially at my age. Jean Piaget, I think, talked about the messianic stage of development. I think it's very difficult for some people to comprehend, or at least accept, the reality that Team Red or Team Blue is not objectively good all the time. It seems very difficult for people. And, you see this with even some atheists, as you mentioned, who say, well, I don't believe in religion, but then their entire existence is posting about atheism or, doing something that essentially shows it's a religion. I'm curious more so about people in the middle who are apathetic to let's say ideology or politics, who are now being forced into a culture that is forcing them to be political. In other words, cancel culture has presented itself in such a way where if you're a sports fan who doesn't like politics, now your sports are politicized. If you are a teacher and you like teaching Dr. Seuss, can't have that anymore. It's gone. So people are essentially, in many ways, being forced to become ideological. And I guess my question to you is, how can they resist the temptation to become ideological and in some cases radicalized by the presence of ideology, by the push of ideology?
Well, that's a good question. I think that your reference to the messianic stage, it's funny, virtually no one ever talks about that aspect of Piagetian theory.
Oh,
I've
really?
also I've often noted that these great psychologists, they're stripped of their bizarreness when they're presented academically, and it's a real disservice because in the more baroque elements of their thought, that's often where the true genius lies. And Piaget's identification of that late adolescent messianic stage is brilliant, I think. But I've heard virtually no one ever talk about it. I
Oh,
certainly never encountered it in any of my classes.
same here. I studied psychology, Dr. Peterson. I found out about Jean Piaget's messianic stage from you. So I certainly didn't hear about it from my psychology classes. So it's such a shame. It's tragic that's, a lot of these psychologists aren't being represented correctly. But I mean, to that
Well, it's
end,
not easy to represent a genius correctly, and it's also terrifying, because genius is terrifying by definition. Um, Look, I think part of the advantage to Christianity is that it provides an outlet for that messianic urge. It it attempts to spiritualize it, right?
yeah,
Conduct your life, conduct the battle within yourself. So it's a real battle. It's a real struggle. It's maybe the ultimate struggle. It's a heroic mission. Get yourself under control. Integrate yourself. Get your house in order. That'll that'll provide something that's sufficiently compelling if you do it seriously, so that ideology will look like a it will pale as a in comparison as an attraction. It just doesn't have the grandeur of that moral mission. Jung thought that you know any sufficient moral effort was an appropriate substitute for psychotherapy. There's a moral discipline. Moral discipline is the antidote to um, to ideology. And I do think, to begin with, to some degree, that has to do with genuine discipline. That's order. It's like pick a discipline. And two of the chapters in Beyond Order are emphasize that is to begin with, you discipline yourself in some direction. At least you learn how to devote your forces to a single end that way. Well, then after you've got yourself under control, I derived some of this thinking from Nietzsche because that was his developmental suggestion, right? Not only for individuals, but also for cultures. He thought that Europe, the European mind, so to speak, had disciplined itself by insisting that everything be explained under the rubric of Catholicism, essentially. Everything had to be explained using that one explanatory system. And then once the capacity to manage such explanations was put in place, then that capacity could be used to solve other problems, and those would be scientific problems, let's say. I think that's a viewpoint that Jung adopted and extended in his analysis of the emergence of science from alchemy. But I think the same thing applies in your own life. It's like, well, pick something that you can do and then discipline yourself, and then see what happens next, because something, you'll change as a consequence of that. Something new will attract your interest. There'll be some different element of that discipline that you'll be compelled to develop. And the best way of doing that, I think, is, well, to note what you're interested in, what's meaningful to you, and also to, in some sense, purify your thought and your perception. And you do that mostly by deciding and practicing it's forbearance of deceit.
If you like that video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to the Post Millennial. For daily news and content, please go to thepostmillennial.com and consider becoming a member. For $5 a month, you can get rid of all the advertisements on the site. If you like what I'm wearing on my head, you can go to shop.postmillennial.com, where we have beanies, mugs, and t-shirts. Please consider supporting the Post Millennial however you can. It's massively appreciated. Thank you.